The brass casings gleamed like frozen amber in the pale December light. Rachel Keene moved methodically across Range 7, her industrial broom scraping against concrete that had absorbed the cold until it felt like permafrost beneath her boots. The thermometer on the range shack had read 14 degrees at 0745, but the wind knifing down from the northeast ridge dropped the wind chill to 8. Her breath crystallized in front of her face, small clouds that dissipated almost instantly in the dry Wyoming air. She was dressed in civilian contractor gear, insulated Carhartt coveralls, orange high-visibility vest marked MC-47, work gloves with the fingertips worn smooth from 3 years of handling spent ammunition and cleaning solvents. Nobody looked twice at her. Nobody ever did. That was the point. Behind her, a SEAL platoon was cycling through rifle qualifications on ranges 5 and 6. The controlled crack of M4A1 fire punctuated the morning at irregular intervals. 3-round bursts, single shots, the occasional sustained volley. Normal sounds, familiar sounds, sounds that Rachel had trained herself to hear without processing, the way a librarian learns to tune out whispered conversations. She swept another pile of .308 brass into her collection bin. 47 casings. She knew without counting. Some habits never die. The first shot that mattered came at 0803. It didn't sound like the training fire. Rachel's entire nervous system registered the difference before her conscious mind caught up. The sharp report, the longer echo, the distinct supersonic crack that came from somewhere beyond the designated firing lines. Her body was already moving, dropping into a crouch behind a concrete barrier before the screaming started. 300 meters southeast, a SEAL instructor named Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Webb went down. The round had caught him center mass, just above his plate carrier, punching through his trapezius muscle and exiting below his clavicle. He hit the frozen ground and didn't get up. If that opening hooked you, trust me, this story only gets more intense. Subscribe now for more real stories of courage and hit that notification bell. Now, let me take you back to what happened next on that Wyoming range. The second shot came 4 seconds later. It hit a SEAL candidate sprinting for cover, catching him in the thigh and spinning him down into the dirt 15 meters from the tree line. He screamed, a raw, animal sound that echoed across the range complex. Rachel's hands had stopped shaking. That was the first warning sign. A normal person's hands would be trembling. A civilian maintenance contractor designated MC-47 should be paralyzed with terror right now, huddled behind cover, waiting for someone else to fix this. Instead, Rachel's hands were steady. Her breathing had automatically slowed to a controlled 4-count inhale, 4-count exhale. Her eyes were scanning the northeast ridge, cataloging angles, calculating distances, triangulating the source of the incoming fire. She could see them now, or rather, she could see what they were doing. Muzzle flashes at 3 distinct positions along a ridgeline roughly 650 meters out. The elevation was wrong for a direct assault. These weren't fighters trying to advance. These were Overwatch positions, kill box architecture. Someone had done their homework. A 4th muzzle flash joined the pattern higher up the ridge. Call it 750 meters. Suppressive fire began sweeping across the range complex in overlapping arcs, pinning the SEAL teams in a classic L-shaped ambush formation. Rachel counted the shots, calculated the cyclic rates. 2 of the shooters were running semi-automatic platforms, probably SR-25s or similar designated marksman rifles. The other 2 had slower rates of fire, bolt action, precision weapons, for shooters, coordinated positions, high-end equipment. This wasn't random terrorism. This was a professional kill team. The SEALs were responding now, but their response was hampered by the fundamental problem of being caught in the open during a training exercise. Most of them had been running qualification drills with limited ammunition loads. They were scrambling for cover, returning fire where they could, but the angles were wrong. The shooters on the ridge had the high ground, concealment in the tree line, and interlocking fields of fire that made movement suicidal. Rachel watched a SEAL team leader, named Senior Chief Garrett Chin, take control of the chaos. Chin was 34 years old, a 12-year veteran of naval special warfare, with 3 combat deployments to Afghanistan and 2 to Syria. He had a reputation for tactical precision that bordered on artistic, The kind of operator who could read a battlefield the way a conductor reads sheet music and know exactly which instruments needed to play when. Right now, he was doing everything right. Voice commands over the radio, directing his men to consolidated cover positions behind the concrete berms that separated the firing ranges, establishing fields of fire, calling in the contact report to base operations. Rachel heard fragments of the transmission carried on the wind. For shooters, Northeast Ridge, estimate 600 to 750 meters, coordinated ambush 2 casualties. Request immediate QRF. The response came back thin and crackling. QRF spinning up, ETA 12 minutes. 12 minutes. Rachel's stomach tightened. In 12 minutes, the shooters on that ridge could methodically eliminate everyone on this range. The SEALs were good, some of the best fighters on the planet, but they were outranged, outpositioned, and working with qualification load magazines instead of combat loadouts. The math was brutal. Another shot cracked across the range. A round sparked off the concrete barrier 3 feet from Chen's position, sending fragments spraying across the frozen ground. He didn't flinch. Instead, he shouldered his own rifle, a customized bolt-action .338 Lapua Magnum that he'd been using for long-range qualification, and began acquiring targets through his Schmidt and Bender scope. Rachel watched him work. Smooth, economical movements, proper breath control, triggered discipline that came from 10,000 hours of practice. He fired. The round went wide. Rachel saw it impact the hillside, roughly 2 meters left of the muzzle flash he'd been engaging. The wind. He'd undercompensated for the quartering gusts that were swirling down from the mountains, 12 to 15 knots, shifting between northeast and east-northeast at irregular intervals. Chun adjusted, fired again, closer, but still off. The shooter he was engaging returned fire, and this time the round didn't miss. It caught Chun in the left shoulder, spinning him away from his rifle and dropping him behind the berm. Blood began spreading across his winter fatigues immediately, bright arterial red that steamed in the cold air. Rachel was moving before she made the conscious decision to move. She stayed low, using the concrete barriers as cover, working her way toward Chen's position with the kind of tactical awareness that no maintenance contractor should possess. Her body remembered the training even when her mind tried to resist it, checking corners, minimizing exposure time during transitions, maintaining situational awareness of the ongoing threat. 30 seconds, 40 meters. She reached Chun. He was propped against a barrier, pressing his right hand against his shoulder, wound with a grimace that suggested he'd been shot before and understood exactly how bad this was. The round had entered just below his collarbone, punching through the muscle and lodging somewhere in his shoulder blade. Not immediately fatal, but debilitating. His left arm hung useless at his side. "What the hell are you doing here?" Chen's voice was strained but controlled. His eyes swept over a contractor vest, the MC-47 designation, the broom she dropped somewhere behind her. "Get to cover and stay down. QRF is 12 minutes, Rachel interrupted. Her voice was steady. Too steady. She saw the flicker of recognition in Chen's eyes. Not recognition of who she was, but recognition of what she was. A civilian doesn't interrupt a wounded SEAL with tactical assessments. A civilian doesn't crawl 30 meters through an active kill zone with that kind of movement discipline. "Who the hell are you?" Chen asked. Rachel didn't answer immediately. She was looking at his rifle, the .338 Lapua Magnum, now lying in the dirt 2 feet away. Scope still intact, bolt still functional. A surgeon rifle's custom action with a Bartline barrel. 26 inches of precision steel. She could see the ammunition remaining in his pocket. 4 rounds, brass catching the pale winter light. 4 rounds. For shooters. The mathematics were either perfect or catastrophic, depending on who was doing the shooting. "How bad?" she asked, nodding toward his shoulder. "Bad enough that I'm not hitting anything with this arm," Chin said through gritted teeth. "Listen, whoever you are, I need you to." 740 meters, Rachel said quietly. Northeast Ridge. 28 to 30 degree down angle from their positions to ours. 12 to 15 knot quartering wind, mostly out of the east-northeast with occasional gusts shifting north. Temperature 14 degrees, density altitude approximately negative 500 feet. Your first shot went left because you held for 12 knots, but the gust hit at 15. Your second shot went high because you overcompensated for the wind correction and undercompensated for the down angle trajectory. Chen stared at her. The pain in his shoulder was temporarily forgotten, replaced by something closer to shock. You made a 3/4 mil windage adjustment, Rachel continued. You needed a full mil, and you added an 8 mil elevation hold for distance, but you didn't subtract the 16th you needed for the down angle ballistic compression. At 740 meters with a 28-degree decline, your round was carrying approximately 40 feet per second more velocity at impact than your calculation assumed. The silence stretched between them for 3 heartbeats. Another shot cracked across the range, but Rachel didn't flinch. She was watching Chen's face, watching him process what she just said, watching him run the calculations in his own head, and realize that she was right. "You're not a contractor," he said finally. "No. What are you?" Rachel reached for his rifle. Her fingers closed around the stock with the familiarity of greeting an old friend or an old enemy. The weight was perfect. The balance was sublime. She hadn't held a weapon like this in 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days. Not since the mission that had broken her. "I'm what you need," she said. Chen's eyes dropped her hands on the rifle, then came back up to her face. He was bleeding heavily now. His sleeve was soaked, and a small pool was forming in the frozen dirt beneath him. He had maybe 10 minutes before shock started compromising his cognitive function. "You know how to use that?" he asked. It wasn't really a question. He already knew the answer. He'd seen her movement discipline. He'd heard her ballistic calculations. He was asking permission, giving her the chance to take ownership of what she was about to do. Rachel chambered around. The action was smooth, practiced, automatic. Her muscle memory hadn't degraded at all. "I'm going to need your spot," she said. Chen shifted, pressing his back harder against the barrier and making room. "Targets are at your 11, 12, and 2 o'clock. Fourth shooter is high at your 1 o'clock, maybe 30 meters above the ridgeline in a rock outcropping. He's the best of them, got the long gun, and he's got patience. The others are laying suppression. He's waiting for clean shots." Rachel nodded. She was already fitting herself into position, adjusting the rifle's bipod legs, settling her cheek against the stock. The scope brought the ridge into crystalline focus. Every rock, every tree, every patch of shadow where a shooter might be concealed. "What's your name?" Chen asked. The question hit harder than any bullet could have. Rachel Keene. That was the name on her contractor ID. The name she'd been living under for 3 years. The name she'd chosen when she erased everything that came before. But Rachel Keene had never fired a weapon. Rachel Keene was a maintenance contractor who swept brass and mopped floors and disappeared into the background of military installations because nobody ever looked twice at the cleaning staff. Rachel Keene was a ghost, a carefully constructed fiction designed to let Evelyn Cross stop existing. Evelyn Cross. 29 confirmed engagements as an Army Special Operations sniper attached to Delta Force. 17 confirmed kills. 3 deployments to Afghanistan. 2 to Syria. 1 to a country whose name was still classified. She had been one of the most lethal precision shooters in the United States military, a quiet professional who excelled at the loneliest job in warfare. And then Kabul. The memory flickered at the edges of Rachel's consciousness like heat lightning. Not the full storm, not yet, but enough to remind her what was waiting. The compound, the hostages, the shot she'd been ordered to take, the shot that had ended her career, her identity, and nearly her sanity. "My name doesn't matter," Rachel said. She put her eye to the scope and let the world narrow to a single point of focus, the muzzle flash at her 11 o'clock position. The shooter was good. He was using the natural terrain for concealment, positioning himself in a shallow depression between 2 boulder formations that created a natural shooting blind. Only his barrel and the top of his head were exposed during the brief moments when he fired. But Rachel didn't need to see his whole body. She just needed to see enough. She began her calculations automatically, running the numbers with the speed of long practice. Range, 680 meters to the first shooter. Wind, steady at 12 knots from her right front, angling across the line of fire at approximately 40 degrees. Temperature effect, negligible at this range, but she noted it anyway. Density altitude, negative, which meant the round would fly slightly flatter than sea level calculations suggested. Down angle, 28 degrees from shooter to target, requiring a reduction in elevation hold. Her scope was zeroed for someone else's eyes, Chen's eyes, with different interpupillary distance and different cheek well preferences. She made the mental adjustments without conscious thought, calculating the offset between where the reticle showed impact and where the round would actually strike based on her own body mechanics. Wind drift at 680 meters with a 12-knot quartering crosswind, 17 inches. Give or take. She dialed a correction. The rifle felt like an extension of her nervous system. Every input traveled through her hands with absolute fidelity. The tension in the trigger, the resistance of the action, the subtle vibration of the barrel as it absorbed the cold. She could feel the wind through the stock, reading its direction and intensity through some instinct that she'd never been able to explain. First target, she murmured. 11 o'clock, 680 meters. Semi-auto platform. Firing cadence suggests State Route 25 or similar. 2-second exposure window between shots. Chen's voice came from beside her, weakened but focused. The one in the rock blind. Yeah, he's been consistent. Pops up, fires twice, drops back down. Predictable. Predictable was good. Predictable was exploitable. Rachel watched through the scope as the shooter rose for another firing sequence. 2 shots, then he'd drop. She had 2 seconds to acquire, confirm, and fire. She didn't take the shot. Instead, she watched. She timed his rhythm. She memorized the exact position where his head appeared above the rock formation. 18 inches of exposure, measured against the mil-dot graduations in her scope. She calculated the lead time required to catch him in mid-rise, before he could react to an incoming shot. What are you waiting for? Chen asked. Confirmation. Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. I need to be sure. The shooter rose again. Same position. Same timing. Same 18 inches of exposure. Rachel had 4 rounds, 4 targets, 0 margin for error. If she missed, the shooters would adjust their positions, and her advantage, surprise, would be gone. She let him drop back into cover. One more cycle. The next time he appeared, she would fire. Her finger found the trigger. Not pressing, not yet, just touching, establishing contact, feeling the break point where mechanical resistance would give way to ignition. The trigger pull on this rifle was set at 2.5 pounds. She'd never fired this specific weapon before, but the fundamentals were universal. Breathe in, breathe out. Let the breath settle at the natural pause between exhale and inhale, the moment when the body was most still. The shooter rose. Rachel's world collapsed to a single point of clarity. She saw the target, the top of his head, the curve of his shoulder, the glint of optics as his scope caught the morning light. She felt the trigger resistance increase under her fingertip, pressing through the slack, finding the wall. 18 inches of exposure, 12-knot crosswind, 680 meters. Her finger completed the pull. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, a firm, controlled recoil that she absorbed through her frame without losing sight picture. The report was sharp in the cold air, carrying across the range complex like a crack of thunder. In her scope, she saw the result. The shooter's head snapped backward. A spray of crimson misted against the rocks behind him, and he collapsed forward into his blind, rifle clattering against stone. No movement. No recovery attempt. 1 down. 3 rounds remaining. Rachel worked the bolt. Lift, pull, push, press, and the spent casing ejected into the frozen dirt beside her. A fresh round chamber with metallic snap. Jesus Christ. Chen breathed. Rachel was already acquiring her next target. The second shooter was at her 12 o'clock, 40 meters east of the first. He'd heard the shot that killed his partner, and he was reacting, shifting position, trying to identify the new threat. His concealment was breaking down as he moved, exposing more of his body than he'd shown during the suppression phase. New calculations. Range, 710 meters. Wind, unchanged, but the angle had shifted, now closer to 60 degrees across a line of fire, which increased the drift coefficient. Down angle, 29 degrees. She adjusted, 1/4 mil right, 1/16 mil down. The shooter spotted her. She saw the moment of recognition in his body language, the sudden freeze, the beginning of a turn toward her position, the attempt to bring his rifle to bear. He was too slow. Rachel fired. The round caught him in the upper chest, punching through his sternum and dropping him into the snow like a puppet whose strings had been cut. He slid several feet down the slope before coming to rest against a fallen log. Two down. 2 rounds remaining. The remaining shooters were reacting now. The third man abandoned his position entirely, scrambling for better cover as he realized the tactical situation had inverted. The fourth, the patient one with the long gun, the one Chin had warned her about, was repositioning more deliberately, using the chaos to improve his angle. Rachel tracked the third shooter through her scope. He was running, weaving between boulders, making himself a difficult target. Smart, but not smart enough. Running targets were different from stationary ones. The calculations multiplied. You had to lead by the right amount, accounting for their speed and direction, while simultaneously correcting for all the environmental factors that affected a stationary shot. She estimated his speed at approximately 5 meters per second. Lateral movement, right to left across her field of fire. Distance, 725 meters and opening. Timed impact at 725 meters with a .338 lap year traveling at roughly 850 meters per second, just under 1 second. In that second, he would travel approximately 4.5 meters. She led him by the appropriate distance. The shot went wide by 6 inches. He stumbled, startled by the near miss, but didn't go down. The round sparked off a boulder behind him and ricocheted into the trees. Damn. Chen's voice was urgent. Third round. Shooter still mobile, 12 o'clock. I know. Rachel worked the bolt. 1 round remaining. The third shooter had reached new cover and was setting up to return fire. The fourth shooter, the patient one, was still repositioning, and she couldn't get a clean angle on him from her current position. The mathematics had become catastrophic. 1 round, 2 targets. She had to choose. The third shooter was immediate threat. He was closer, more exposed, and already bringing his rifle around. If she let him set up, he'd have a clean shot at her position within the next 10 seconds. The fourth shooter was a strategic threat. He was the best of them, the one with a precision rifle, the one with the patience, the one who'd been waiting for clean shots while his partners laid suppression. If she engaged the third shooter and took him down, the fourth would have a clear window to eliminate her before she could reload. There were no good options. Only choices between different kinds of failure. Rachel made her choice. She ignored the third shooter. Instead, she shifted her aim to the high rock outcropping where the fourth man was repositioning. She could see him now. A dark figure moving behind a natural stone barrier, his .338 bolt action cradled against his chest. He was good. He'd chosen his new position perfectly, with excellent concealment and a commanding view of the entire range complex. In 3 seconds, he'd be set up. In 4 seconds, he'd be acquiring targets. In 5 seconds, he'd be firing, and his first shot would go exactly where it needed to go. Rachel didn't have 5 seconds. She had 1. She made the ballistic calculations faster than conscious thought. Range, 770 meters, the longest shot of the engagement. Wind, 12 knots, quartering right to left. Down angle, 31 degrees, compensated for trajectory compression. Target velocity, approximately 2 meters per second, moving into position rather than sprinting. Lead requirement, minimal. The third shooter was acquiring her position. She could see his muzzle swinging toward the barrier where she lay. She fired. The .338 Lapua round covered 770 meters in less than 1 second. It crossed the intervening space with a trajectory that accounted for gravity, wind, altitude, temperature, humidity, barrel harmonics, and a dozen other factors that Rachel calculated without calculating. The way a musician plays a difficult passage without consciously thinking about each note. The fourth shooter went down. His rifle clattered against the rocks as he collapsed, and he didn't move again. Rachel was already rolling before the third shooter returned fire. His round hit the concrete barrier where her head had been a half-second earlier, spraying fragments that stung her exposed neck and face. She came up in a new position, empty rifle in her hands, facing an armed hostile 725 meters away with 0 ammunition remaining. This was the moment when everything she trained for, everything she become, everything she tried to bury, all of it came down to a single question. Was she still Evelyn Cross? Or had she truly become Rachel Keene, the woman who disappeared into maintenance contracts and never held a weapon? The third shooter was adjusting his aim. He had a clear shot now. 5 seconds, maybe 6, and it would be over. Rachel's hand moved without conscious direction. She reached for the first object within grasp, a chunk of concrete debris, roughly the size of a baseball, and threw it with every ounce of force she could generate. Not at the shooter, obviously. At 725 meters, a thrown rock was meaningless. But the motion drew his attention. His eye tracked the debris as it arced uselessly through the air, and in that fraction of a second, his focus shifted away from his scope. It was enough. The shot that killed the third shooter came from behind Rachel, from the sealed positions where the surviving operators had been pinned down throughout the engagement. Senior Chief Marcus Webb's teammate, a sniper named Petty Officer First Class David Reyes, had finally acquired a clean angle while the hostile was distracted. The round hit center mass. The shooter went down. Silence fell across the Wyoming range like a physical weight. Rachel lay in the frozen dirt, her breath coming in controlled gas that steamed in the morning air. The .338 Lapua Magnum was warm in her hands despite the cold, barrel heat radiating through the stock, reminding her of what she'd just done. 3 shots, 3 kills, at ranges between 680 and 770 meters, in conditions that would challenge any shooter on Earth. She had fired a weapon she'd never used before from a position she hadn't sighted in, with borrowed ammunition she hadn't tested. And she hadn't missed once. Not since Kabul had she demonstrated anything like this capability. Kabul, the words surfaced in her consciousness like a corpse floating up through dark water, and with it came the memories she'd spent 3 years trying to bury. The compound, the hostages, the mission that was supposed to be routine, a precision interdiction of a mid-level Taliban commander who'd been moving HVD intelligence to Pakistani contacts. Her team had been in position for 6 hours, waiting for confirmation, waiting for the go order, waiting. The commander had arrived with unexpected company. 3 American journalists who'd been taken hostage 6 weeks earlier and never recovered. He was using them as human shields, moving them through the compound in a way that suggested he knew exactly where the American snipers were positioned. The orders had come down. Take the shot. Collateral damage was acceptable. The intelligence he was carrying was too valuable to let slip. Evelyn Cross had put her crosshairs on the Taliban commander's head and known with absolute certainty, that the bullet would pass through him and into the woman standing directly behind him, a journalist named Sarah Winters, 28 years old, married with 2 children back in Chicago. She'd taken the shot anyway. Orders were orders. The commander died. Sarah Winters died. 2 children grew up without their mother because Evelyn Cross followed orders. And Evelyn Cross had died too, in every way that mattered. She completed her deployment, returned to Fort Bragg, submitted her resignation, and systematically erased every trace of her existence. New identity, new life, new purpose, which was to have no purpose at all except disappearing. Rachel Keene was born in the ashes of that decision. But Rachel Keene had just proven herself a fiction, a comfortable lie that couldn't survive contact with reality. Hey! Chen's voice cut through her spiral. Hey! Stay with me. Rachel blinked. The memories receded, though they didn't disappear entirely. They never disappeared entirely. I'm here, she said. QRF is inbound. 2 minutes. Chen's voice was weaker now. Blood loss was taking its toll, and his face had gone pale beneath his winter tan. The shooters, they're all down? All 4. Rachel released her grip on the rifle and let it rest in the dirt beside her. Your people might want this back. My people are going to want answers. Chen's eyes found hers, and she saw the questions forming there, the questions she'd spent 3 years avoiding. Who are you? Where did you come from? How does a maintenance contractor shoot like that? Rachel didn't answer. Instead, she pushed herself up to a kneeling position and started assessing Chen's wound. The bleeding had slowed. His tourniquet work and direct pressure had bought him time, but he needed surgical intervention soon. The round had done significant damage to his shoulder joint. Lie still, she said. Medics will be here in 90 seconds. That's not an answer. No, it isn't. The sound of helicopter rotors reached them from the southwest. UH-60 Blackhawks, probably the QRF team plus a medevac bird. Rachel watched them approach, black shapes against the pale winter sky, and felt the familiar weight of exposure settling onto her shoulders. It was over. Whatever anonymity she'd purchased with 3 years of quiet service, whatever peace she'd found in becoming nobody, it was gone now. She put 3 shooters down in front of witnesses who would report every detail. Her fingerprints were on the rifle. Her movements had been observed. Her skills had been displayed. The intelligence community would have questions. The Naval Special Warfare Command would have questions. The people she spent 3 years hiding from, the politicians, the investigators, the bureaucrats who wanted her court-martialed for the Kabul incident, all of them would resurface now. Evelyn Cross was about to be dragged back into the light, whether she wanted it or not. The Black Hawk settled onto the range complex in a storm of rotor wash that kicked up frozen dirt and spent brass. SEALs began deploying before the skids touched ground, a 16-man quick reaction force plus a 4-man medical team, all of them moving with the coordinated precision that came from years of operational practice. Rachel stayed where she was, kneeling beside Chun, hands visible and away from any weapons. She knew how this worked. The QRF would secure the perimeter first, verify the threats were neutralized, then begin processing the scene. Anyone who looked out of place would be treated as a potential hostile until proven otherwise. She very much looked out of place. Contact. Blue Force, Blue Force. The call came from one of the approaching SEALs, a chief petty officer whose name tape read Vasquez. He'd spotted Rachel's contractor vest and was gesturing for his team to hold fire. Civilian present, one wounded operator. The medical team converged on Chin immediately, replacing Rachel's improvised care with practiced trauma protocols. She stepped back to give them room, and immediately found herself facing a semicircle of armed SEALs who seemed uncertain whether she was a victim or threat. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me." Vasquez's voice was professionally neutral, but his eyes were scanning her with a practiced assessment of someone who'd spent years identifying threats. "This is an active crime scene. We're going to need a statement." "Understood." Rachel let herself be escorted away from the medical team, past the concrete barriers where she'd taken her shots, toward the range shack where her day had started 90 minutes earlier. The broom she'd been using was still lying where she'd dropped it. The bin of collected brass had tipped over during her sprint to Chen's position, scattering casings across the frozen ground. Normal things. Objects from a normal life that had ended the moment she picked up that rifle. "What's your name, ma'am?" Vasquez asked. "Rachel Keene, contractor maintenance staff, MC 47. "You're pretty calm for someone who just survived an ambush." Rachel didn't respond. They reached the range shack. Vasquez positioned her inside, out of the wind, but visible through the windows to his team, and began taking her preliminary statement. Standard questions. What did you see? When did you first become aware of the attack? Did you observe anything unusual before the shooting started? She answered truthfully, up to a point. Yes, she'd been sweeping brass. Yes, she'd heard the first shot and sought cover. Yes, she'd moved to Senior Chief Chen's position after he was wounded. And then what happened? Vasquez asked. This was where the truth became complicated. Chun was hit. He couldn't use his rifle. The shooters were too far out for your team's M4S, and QRF was 12 minutes away. He asked me to help. Help how? Rachel's eyes met Vasquez's. She saw the suspicion there, the dawning realization that something about her story didn't fit. He gave me his rifle, she said quietly, and I used it. The silence that followed was profound. You. Vasquez's voice had changed. Harder now, more focused. You shot 3 hostiles at 700 meters with a borrowed rifle in 12-degree weather with a quartering crosswind. Yes. With no prior indication that you had any weapons training whatsoever. Yes. On your contractor application, you listed your previous employment as administrative assistant at a trucking company in Cheyenne. Yes. Do you want to tell me what's really going on here, Ms. Keene? Rachel was saved from having to answer by the arrival of more helicopters. These weren't Black Hawks. They were smaller, faster, with a distinctive profile of intelligence community aviation assets. Within 5 minutes of their landing, she was no longer being questioned by SEALs. She was being questioned by men in suits who didn't bother to identify themselves. They moved her from the range shack to a secure facility on the far side of the training complex, a windowless building that she'd walked past dozens of times without ever seeing anyone enter or leave. The interior was exactly what she'd expected. Soundproofed interrogation rooms, one-way glass, recording equipment that wasn't even trying to be subtle. The man across the table introduced himself as Agent Morrison, Defense Intelligence Agency. His partner, a woman with sharp eyes and a Justice Department badge, called herself Agent Chun, no relation to the sniper Rachel had saved. Evelyn Grace Cross, Morrison began, laying a tablet on the table with her military service record displayed. Staff Sergeant, United States Army. Attached to 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, 2014 to 2019. 17 confirmed kills across 4 combat deployments. Recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross, the Bronze Star with Valor and the Purple Heart. Rachel said nothing. Resigned under pressure following the Kabul incident in 2019, Morrison continued. Cleared of criminal charges but flagged for psychological evaluation. Dropped off the grid 3 months later. Change your name, your appearance, your entire life. Became Rachel Keene, a nobody who swept floors for military contractors. Still nothing. 3 years of hiding. 3 years of keeping your head down. And then this morning, you put 3 precision shots downrange and reminded everyone who you really are. Is there a question in there? Rachel asked. Morrison leaned forward. The question, Staff Sergeant, is why. Why would you blow your cover to save a bunch of SEALs you've never met? Why risk everything you built to step back into the world you ran away from? Rachel's jaw tightened. People were dying. I had the skills to stop it. Was I supposed to let them die so I could keep pretending to be someone else? That depends. Agent Chin interjected. Were you involved in planning this attack? The accusation hit like a physical blow. Rachel's eyes snapped to the Justice Department agent, reading the suspicion in her posture. You think I set this up? You have to admit, the optics are curious. A former Delta sniper, hiding under a false identity at a SEAL training facility, happens to be perfectly positioned when a coordinated sniper ambushed targets that same facility. If you wanted to insert yourself back into the special operations community, demonstrating your value in a crisis would be an effective method. 4 men attacked this base, Rachel said, her voice gone cold. 2 SEALs were wounded. One of them nearly bled out in front of me. If you think I orchestrated that so I could, what exactly? Get a job offer? We don't know what you want, Staff Sergeant. That's the problem. Morrison tapped the tablet. You disappeared for 3 years. You could have been recruited by anyone during that time. Foreign intelligence services, domestic extremist groups, private military contractors with flexible ethics. I was sweeping floors and avoiding people. So you say, the interrogation continued for hours. They asked about her movements over the past 3 years, where she lived, who she contacted, what she'd done with her time. They asked about the Kabul incident, about the decisions that had led to her resignation, about the mental state she'd been in when she'd vanished. They asked if she'd known the shooters, if she'd communicated with anyone suspicious, if she'd deliberately maintained a false identity in order to facilitate this attack. Rachel answered everything honestly, though she knew they wouldn't believe her. The truth was too simple. She'd hidden because she couldn't face herself anymore. She'd taken the shots because letting innocent people die wasn't something she could live with, no matter how much she'd wanted to stop being a killer. Sometime around sunset, the door opened and a new face entered the room. An older man in navy dress blues, 3 stars on his collar. Vice Admiral Harrison Drake, commander of Naval Special Warfare Command. Morrison and Chin stood immediately. Rachel remained seated. Leave us, Drake said. The agents exchanged glances but didn't argue. Within 30 seconds, Rachel was alone with the Admiral. Drake settled into the chair across from her with the ease of a man who conducted thousands of difficult conversations. His face was weathered, tanned by decades of sun and wind, with deep lines around his eyes that could have been from smiling or from squinting through binoculars across hostile waters. Staff Sergeant Cross, he said quietly. It's been a long time. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Sir, you don't remember me. That's fair. You were a sergeant at the time, and I was a captain on a liaison assignment. But I remember you. Kandahar, 2016. You provided overwatch for an extraction operation I was coordinating. Saved 3 of my SEALs when an ambush went sideways. The memories surfaced through the fog of years. A dusty hillside. A convoy under fire. 3 shots. 3 threats eliminated. And a quiet drive back to base where nobody talked about what had almost happened. I remember, Rachel said. Then you understand why I'm here instead of letting the spooks turn you inside out. Drake leaned forward. Senior Chief Chin told me what you did today. He told me about the ballistic calculations you made on the fly, the shots you took with a rifle you'd never fired before, the precision you demonstrated under fire. He said it was the finest piece of shooting he's ever witnessed. Chen's losing blood and running on adrenaline. His memory might be compromised. His memory's fine. And so is the video footage from the range security cameras. Drake's voice hardened slightly. We have everything, Cross. Every shot, every movement, every moment from the time you broke cover until the time you put down the fourth shooter. There's no ambiguity here. You're exactly what Chin says you are. Rachel's silence was its own kind of confirmation. The question, Drake continued, is what happens next? DIA wants to charge you with maintaining a false identity on a military installation. Justice thinks they can make a conspiracy case if they squeeze hard enough. There are people in Washington who never forgave you for Kabul, and they'd love to see you in courtroom. And you? I think those people are idiots. Drake's tone was matter-of-fact. I think you saved lives today. I think you demonstrated skills that this country desperately needs. And I think the bureaucrats who want to crucify you for following orders 3 years ago are the same bureaucrats who gave those orders in the first place. Rachel said nothing. There was nothing to say. Here's what's going to happen, Drake continued. The 4 shooters you engaged today were part of a foreign intelligence operation targeting naval special warfare assets. We don't know their exact affiliation yet, but early indicators suggest Russian or Chinese backing. This wasn't domestic terrorism. This was an act of war by proxy. That changes things. It changes everything. A coordinated sniper attack on a SEAL training facility is the kind of incident that gets briefed to the president. And when the president asks how we stopped it, I'm going to tell him about a former Delta sniper named Evelyn Cross, who came out of retirement to put down 4 enemy combatants with 4 rounds. 3 rounds, Rachel corrected automatically. Petty Officer Reyes took the 4th shooter with his M4 after I drew his attention. Drake almost smiled. Precision in all things. That's what I remember about you. He stood, straightening his uniform. The conspiracy charges are going away. The false identity charges are going away. Your service record is about to receive some very favorable annotations. And in exchange? No exchange. This is what you deserve. Drake paused at the door. But if you wanted to stop hiding, if you wanted to use those skills for something more meaningful than sweeping brass, I could make some introductions. Rachel stared at the table for a long moment. 3 years of careful anonymity, shattered in 90 seconds of gunfire. 3 years of running from who she was, only to discover that you can't run from yourself. You can only postpone the reckoning. I'll think about it, she said finally. That's all I'm asking. Drake left. The door closed behind him, and Rachel sat alone in the interrogation room, surrounded by the ghosts of everyone she'd killed and everyone she'd failed to save. Morning came eventually. Rachel had been released from custody sometime after midnight, with instructions to remain on the installation until further notice. They'd given her a room in the transient quarters, a small space with a narrow bed, a desk, and a window facing east toward the mountains. She hadn't slept. Instead, she'd sat by that window, watching the stars wheel overhead and the moon track its slow arc across the Wyoming sky. The cold seeped in through the glass, a constant reminder of the winter outside, but she barely noticed it. She was thinking about Sarah Winters. She was thinking about the journalist's children, 2 girls, 9 and 11 years old now, growing up with only photographs and fading memories of their mother. She wondered if they knew what had happened, if they understood that their mother had died because Evelyn Cross followed orders instead of following her conscience. That was a truth she'd never been able to escape, no matter how far she ran or how thoroughly she reinvented herself. She hadn't missed in Kabul. The shot had been perfect, through the commander's skull, through Sarah Winters' chest, exactly as she calculated it would go. She'd known what would happen, and she'd done it anyway. That was the thing that broke her. Not the killing itself, but the knowing, the deliberate choice to prioritize a mission over an innocent life, because that was what the mission required. She'd told herself that she was done making those choices. That Rachel Keene would never face the impossible mathematics of combat, where human lives became variables in an equation with no good solutions. But here she was, 3 new kills to add to her ledger, 3 more lives ended by her hand. And yet, it felt different this time. In Kabul, she'd kill because she was ordered to. Today, she'd kill because people were dying and she could stop it. The first was obedience. The second was choice. Maybe that was the difference that mattered. Maybe the problem had never been the killing itself, but the surrendering of her judgment to someone else's priorities. Maybe the path forward wasn't to stop being a weapon, but to become a weapon that chose its own targets. The sun began to rise, painting the mountains in shades of pink and gold. Rachel watched the light spread across the snow-covered peaks, and for the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel the urge to run. She thought about Drake's offer, the chance to step back into the world she'd abandoned, but on her own terms this time, not as someone else's instrument, but as her own operator. It was terrifying. It was also the only thing that felt true. A knock at the door interrupted her contemplation. She rose, expecting more intelligence agents or military brass with additional questions. Instead, she found Garrett Chun. He was in a wheelchair, his left arm in a sling and his face pale from blood loss, but his eyes were clear and focused. A corpsman stood behind him, clearly uncomfortable with the senior chief's decision to leave medical supervision. "You look like hell," Rachel observed. "You're one to talk." Chun wheeled himself into the room, without waiting for an invitation. "They told me you were still here. Thought you might have wrapped it by now. Considered it. What stopped you?" Rachel thought about the question for a moment. "I spent 3 years running from who I was. Today I found out that person followed me anyway. Running again wouldn't change anything." Chun nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he'd suspected. "I read your file. What there was of it, anyway. Most of it is redacted so heavily it looks like a barcode. But I got enough. And I think you made a hard call in Kabul because someone above you made a bad call, and you've been punishing yourself ever since." Chen's voice was quiet but firm. "I think you're wrong to do that. And I think what you did today proves you're still one of us, no matter what name you're using." Rachel's throat tightened. She hadn't expected this understanding, acceptance, the absolution she'd never been able to give herself, offered freely by a man she'd known for less than 24 hours. "I killed that woman," she said, deliberately, knowing what would happen. "You also saved 2 of my teammates and probably a dozen others by putting down those shooters before QRF arrived." Chin met her eyes squarely. "Bad math happens. Impossible choices get made. What matters is what you do next." The sunrise was fully underway now, flooding the room with warm light that seemed to wash away some of the cold that had accumulated in Rachel's bones. "Drake offered to bring me back in," she said. "I know. He asked my opinion first." "What did you tell him?" Chin almost smiled. "I told him that anyone who can shoot like that shouldn't be sweeping brass." He turned his wheelchair toward the door. "Think about it, Evelyn, or Rachel, whoever you decide to be. The community could use someone with your skills. And for what I can tell, you could use something worth fighting for." He wheeled himself out. The door closed. Rachel stood at the window, watching the sun climb above the mountains, and thought about choices, about identity, about the person she'd been, the person she pretended to be, and the person she might become. 3 years ago, she'd erased herself because she couldn't live with what she'd done. Today, maybe she could start figuring out who she wanted to be instead. The sunrise painted the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and crimson, and Evelyn Cross, Rachel Keene, whoever she was now, stepped forward into the light. Rachel's story shows us that we don't get to choose the moments that define us, only how we respond to them. If this kept you engaged, hit that like button. Tell me in the comments, would you have picked up the rifle, knowing it would destroy the life you built? Subscribe if you haven't already. More stories like this are coming. See you in the next one.